Well, good morning, River City Church. Hope you guys are doing well this morning. If you're a guest with us, I want to say a special welcome to you. My name is David Tillman, one of the pastors here on staff, and you've joined us this morning for what is week 2 of our series entitled Refocus Your Life, where we're talking about refocusing your life on the things that matter here in this new year. And this message today really began over 20 years ago, at least for me, because I was reminded of how we can refocus our lives on God in probably one of the most unlikely places that you would possibly imagine. It was over 20 years ago. Jennifer and I were newly married. And at this time, I know when I remember the story that we were newly married because I had planned a surprise trip for us, a weekend surprise trip. And I did not yet know at this time in our marriage that my wife does not like surprises. So this was a bad call on my part that, okay, lesson learned. But as we're driving to the airport in Nashville to board the plane, she didn't even yet know where we were going. I handed her the dossier that I had prepared, which was a binder that with all the printouts, this is a long time ago, of every single thing that we were going to do, the itinerary for our flights, the boarding passes, for the subway map so that we could get around the city that we were going to, the place that we were going to go to eat. There were, reservations in there, like all of this itinerary. But because I threw her off with the surprise thing, she still wasn't really as excited as me yet. And so I wanted to get her on the same page as me. So I said, look, flip to the back of the binder and let me just go with, this is the biggest thing I've got. I have been for the past several weeks on the phone, just burning it up, trying to get tickets. And I finally did to the Oprah Winfrey Show. And there's Oprah right there. That's the show. If you didn't know and you didn't remember, just say you're too young to know. I bet you've heard of Oprah, but if it doesn't mean anything to you or you never would want to go to the show, let me tell you that from 1986 to 2011, when the show was on the air, it was the biggest of deals. And everybody who was anybody wanted to be on the show. So every celebrity was trying to get on there, all of this kind of stuff. And then everybody else wanted to just go to the show to see what would happen. So we were talking about, hey, I wonder, what's going to happen at the show this time. And me and Jennifer were talking about, well, maybe there'll be a celebrity there. Maybe there'll be something interesting. The only thing I wanted to happen when we were there is a repeat of a show that had happened not that long before this. You guys have probably heard about this one. She gave everybody, all 300 people in the studio audience, a free car. And she said, you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. You guys remember this? Have you maybe heard this? That actually happened, but there was nothing under our seat because as soon as we got in there, I looked, there was nothing under there, and we got nothing. But it was a really, really cool experience. And weirdly, the thing that was the coolest about it is what happened, or at least this lesson that I learned, happened after the show was done taping. Everything was over, and she just says, does anybody have any questions for me? And she opens it up. Well, a lot of people did. And they asked a lot of interesting questions, like the ones that you would think of. If you okay, what was your life like growing up? What's it like to, know all the people that you know? What's your life like now compared to then? Just all of these type of questions. But there was a moment in the questions that the atmosphere in the room kind of turned. And it got a little strange. The person sitting right next to us, we had been talking to them all day because this is what my wife does, and we make friends everywhere we go, and this lady was now our friend. She stood up, and she just starts bawling, and she's telling Oprah how important she is, like in her life. And I'm like, okay, all right. And she's crying really uncontrollably, and she says, you're the reason that so many great things have happened in my life. In fact, you're the reason that my daughter graduated from law school. And I'm like, we looked at each other with a weird look like, what could that mean? She's the reason your daughter graduated from law school? Okay. You get a little carried away. But anyway, it got weirder. Across the room, the next person that stood up, and I'm not exaggerating this. You can ask my wife. This person gets up. They're bawling now. And she says the following words, Oprah, you are the most important thing in my life. And she's crying. And she says, every morning, I just want to thank you. You've given me so much direction. Every morning I go in my closet, I shut the door, and on the other side of the door, there's a life-size poster of you. And every single morning I say, what would Oprah do? As I look and I stare at your picture and you've given me direction in life, I am not exaggerating. I didn't hear a single other word that was said the entire morning because I thought, this is bizarre. And I'm looking around to see, surely other people think this is bizarre. And I'm looking around and not that many people do, seemingly, or at least they have a better poker face than I do. They're just like nodding along, like, yeah, I get that. And I don't. So as we were leaving, we had a conversation that we did not expect to have. And the conversation went something like this. We're walking away, and the conversation is, wow, everyone on planet Earth, you and I are designed and made to respond to who or what we value most. And the crazy thing is that if that thing isn't God, then you don't just opt out of worship. What happens is you just begin to give your worship to the thing that you actually do value most. You give it to something else. And I don't know why this was so surprising to me. I think maybe it was surprising to me is because I had bought, at some level, the false belief that worship is something like singing songs. Well, worship is singing songs. When Matt and the band were up here, that was worship. Or worship is going to an hour service on a Sunday morning. And we call that a worship service. So maybe that's what worship is. But worship is and always has been so much more than that. In fact, the word worship comes from an Anglo-Saxon term. It's two words joined together, worth, ship. And literally it just means to ascribe worth to. So worship is to ascribe worth to the thing that matters the most in your life. Because in the heart of every human, in your heart, in my heart, there is a throne. And there's something or someone on that throne. And that thing is the thing that has your worship today. It's the thing you value above all. Could be a lot of things. Could be a relationship. It could be a celebrity, like I thought I was seeing in that room that day. Oh, it could be that it's money. It could be that it's status, or it could be that it's power. It could be a million different things, or it could be the Creator, God, that is on the throne in your life. But everyone worships something. We all worship something. And this reality is something that's clearly laid out in the Scriptures. And I want to show you this in the first chapter of Romans today. Verses 18 through 25 is where we're going to be first. And in the beginning of this letter to the church at Rome, the Apostle Paul is writing to them, and he starts off by reminding them about the gospel of Jesus. He reminds them, he says, hey, the thing I'm not ashamed of, the thing that is my message is the gospel of Jesus, what Jesus has done, because what Jesus has done, that is the power to save every single person that believes. Every single person that comes to him. And then he makes kind of a hard turn from that. And he starts to talk about the people that reject that reject God and refuse to worship him as God. And this is how he describes the reality of people that do that don't have God in the center of their life. He says, for God's wrath, verse 18, is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Since what can be known about God is evident among them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without excuse. For though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became worthless, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, four-footed animals, and reptiles. Therefore, God delivered them over in the desires of their hearts to sexual impurity so that their bodies were degraded among themselves. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served what has been created instead of the Creator, who is praised forever. Amen. That is a stunning passage of Scripture. First of all, Paul is saying, he says right there at the outset, that the eternal power and the very nature of God is evident. It's evident to every single person on the planet. He says through creation, he has communicated and is communicating who he is and his power. He says it's clear, yet many people suppress that. They push that down. They don't want to believe that. And what happens when they do is they exchange the glory that's meant for God alone, and they don't give that to the Creator, but instead to the created. They exchange the truth. The truth is that God alone is the one worthy of our praise, and then exchange that for a lie, that created things are worthy of our worship and of our honor. So the thing that I want you to see here is that when they do this, they don't cease to be worshipers. It wasn't like, yes, I see the options. It's worship or not worship. No, they are worshiping when they take this turn. They don't opt out. They just exchange the object of their worship. Not the living God, not the Creator, but instead the created thing. They knew God, but didn't glorify Him. Didn't want to give Him gratitude, and said, no, I'm gonna worship the created instead. That is why the title of the message today, if you like to know kind of where we're going and what the title is not, hey, let's be worshipers, or it's time to worship in 2024. The title of the message is Refocus Your Worship, because the reality is you are a worshiper. I am a worshiper. Everyone on planet Earth is a worshiper. Now, some may push back on that and say, because we've believed this myth, well, that's not really my thing. I don't really like singing songs or, going to church on Sunday or anything. Like, I'm not into worship. I'm going to kind of opt out of that. The reality, though, as we've seen, is that all of us are worshipers. So a better question is, what are you worshiping? What or who are you worshiping? And it turns out that this is a very important question for several different reasons, and not the least of which is this reason, that what we worship determines what we become. That when we worship, it's not a passive thing, that we are changed through the process of worshiping, and what we worship is what we become. Psalm 115 is one place where this is seen really clearly. The psalmist is describing those that worship not just created things, but things even that they have created with their hands. Idols that they've created with their hands. And this is what the psalmist says, 115 starting in verse 4. Their idols are silver and gold made by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but they cannot hear, noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel, feet but cannot walk. They cannot make a sound with their throats. Those who make them are just like them, as are all who trust in them. What you worship matters because we become like the thing that we worship. And what the psalmist is saying is that if we worship the created, if we worship inanimate objects even, then we become like the things that we worship. We become twisted by the lies of our culture. We become deadened to spiritual reality. Though we have eyes, we can't see it anymore. And though we have ears, we can't hear God anymore. We can't hear reality and truth. We can't tell truth from lies. And ultimately, we end up chasing fulfillment. We end up chasing significance in places, first of all, that we're never going to find it because we were never designed to. We're looking to those things to provide for us something that they never could. And the American novelist David Foster Wallace, who was himself an agnostic, he was speaking at Kenyon College in 2005 to a graduating class, not long before he himself tragically committed suicide. And he offers one of the most haunting insights that I've ever read into this reality that we become what we worship. Listen to what Wallace said. He said to these students, everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. When time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally grieve you. Worship power, you'll end up feeling weak and afraid, and you'll need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you'll end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. But the insidious thing about these forms of worship is they're unconscious. They are default settings. Wow. What an important commentary on Romans 1 that we read, but then on Psalm 115. And how tragic that he never understood how insightful his comments were. This is someone that knew by experience that what we worship matters, because he had tried to worship all these things and all of them left him feeling empty, insignificant. And what he's saying to everyone is, you don't stay the same on the other side of this. You become like what you chase. And if you chase all these other things, they will take the significance and the fulfillment out of your life. And he's saying what you'll find is you'll find that you have a life that's apart from God. And you'll never receive what you're looking for. It's like chasing a mirage. And there's a terrible warning, but in this warning, I want you to see that he alludes to, at the beginning of it, the truth. That for those of us that worship God, that see him, that have Jesus in focus as the object of our worship, that the other side is true as well. If we worship the Creator God, we also become like what we are worshiping. Not that we become God, obviously, but he transforms us into his image, where we agree with the things that he agrees with. He transforms our character. And I want you to see in 2 Corinthians 3:18 the way that the Apostle Paul describes this. He says, we all, with unveiled faces, are looking as in a mirror at the glory of the Lord and are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory. This is from the Lord, who is the Spirit. And the context here is this, that when we believe the gospel, when we see the gospel, we see what Jesus has done for us, that a veil falls from our eyes. We see that salvation is not about what we do or we don't do, but that it's based on what Jesus has done. That in him and because of his sacrifice, we can be free from shame, forgiven by grace, loved sons and daughters of a perfect Father. And as we see that, it amazes us, because we know we're unworthy of this, and we stand in awe of him. And when we stand in awe of him and we see him, then we are changed by what we see. We're changed more into the likeness of the one that we worship. Well, what does this look like on a daily basis? And that's the question I have as I hear, this is great, but like, how do we pull this down out of heaven and get our arms around it? Like, what does this mean this afternoon? What does this mean tomorrow? What does this change the way that I live my life? And I think the easiest way, or the best passage I know to describe this, is at the end of this letter to Romans in chapter 12. The Apostle Paul, Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, says the following. Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. Now, as we read the beginning of that, therefore, brothers and sisters, we see that we're getting into a message that is in progress. Because the cheesy thing is, if you never heard it before, if you have, I apologize. But when you see a therefore in Scripture, you need to ask yourself, what is this there for? Because it's obviously, it's for something that came before it, right? So he's saying, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God. So what's he talking about? Well, the first 11 chapters of this letter to the church at Rome is what he's talking about. And I'll just give you a really short sketch of what he said. He said a lot of what Jonathan said in the message last week, that he explains to them the story of God. And he says that, look, God made the earth. And he looked and he said it was good. Everything was perfect. And he put people there and they were in relationship with him. And there was no shame and there was relationship and it was good. But they rebelled against him. And they said, we're not going to worship you anymore. Now we're going to worship something else. And since then, everyone's been running from God. And so God comes back, so many overtures of love towards them instead of casting them off. And he says, here's my law. And so seeing God's standard, they still couldn't obey it. And it's like, we see that that's good, but we can't do it. And so instead of casting them off again, he says in Romans chapter 5 that therefore at the right time, while you and I were still sinners, that Christ came and he died for us. And literally, in doing that, he comes and he lives the life that meets the standard that you and I should meet. And then he dies the death that you and I deserve to die because we were unable to meet the standard, therefore satisfying both of those. And then he says, toward the end of the book, Romans chapter 8, he says, there's therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. Because what Jesus has done for you, the life he lived, the death he died, you are under no condemnation. You are free if you are in Christ. Therefore, in view of the mercies of God. That's what the therefore is there for. He says, I urge you, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. So step one, if we're going to refocus our worship to God, is that the first thing we have to do is we've got to get the mercies of God in view. All of those things that I just laid out, we've got to remember that in our life. Not so much remember as keep on remembering, because we forget, do we not? So keep the mercies of God in view. Give glory to God. Show gratitude to God. And the interesting thing about this is that this is not some task. Another thing that worship is not some task that we do in order that we might get something from God. Okay, I'm gonna sing my heart out today. I might slip a hand up there. I don't know. I'm gonna worship today. I'm gonna sing these songs. And then maybe on the flip side of it, I'll get something out of it. Or maybe I'm gonna go and I'm gonna serve the community today so that God will look at me and he'll say, wow, that was a good job. I like you a little bit more than I did a few minutes ago. And that sounds silly, but that's not what worship is. Worship is the opposite. Worship is in view of the mercies of God. It's not in view of what I've done. It's in view of what he's done. And we say, in view of what you've done, I offer myself to you. It's not a task I'm completing. It's a gift I'm giving back to you because you've given so much to me. So I want to offer myself up. You gave everything for me, so here's my all-in moment. I'm going to give you everything. And I don't have time today to think about or talk us kind of through, or maybe not even have the wisdom to do this anyway, all the possibilities that this could look like. Like, what does this look like tomorrow morning at my job, or this afternoon at my job? Or what does this look like when I go to school tomorrow? Or how does, in view of the mercies of God, how do I worship God in car line tomorrow? How does that change how that happens? Well, the cool thing is I don't have to do that. I don't have to tell you that because you are a worshiper. And what Paul's saying is the only thing you really have to do is you just have to get the mercies of God in view in your life. And if you get the God of glory on the throne in your heart and you are focused on him, giving glory to him, giving gratitude to him, everything that you do will flow from that, and therefore it will be worship. Carline will be worship in view of the mercies of God. You are a worshiper. So he says that's what we're supposed to do. And then there's one don't. There's one don't on the backside. You knew a don't was coming. But this don't is not what you expect. This is a different kind of don't. He says, don't be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, that word, conform to this age, is literally do not be pressed into the mold of. So if there's a mold of this age, if there's what is normal in Bartlett, Tennessee, United States of America, world 2024, whatever that mold looks like that's normal, he's saying don't get pressed into that. Another way to think of it that helps me, maybe it'll help you, but it's like a pose. It's like somebody that strikes a pose. You know, there's a normal pose in our culture. This is how someone's supposed to act. This is how someone looks. He's saying don't strike the pose of this age that you live in. Instead, don't allow that to conform you. Instead, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Instead, agree with God. Don't buy the lies, he's saying, of the father of lies. So there's one source of truth, and it's God. And if we agree with that, then we know that everything else that disagrees with the truth is a lie, and it's from the father of lies. So why would we believe literally anything that comes from the guy whose name is literally the father of lies? But yet there's the God who is truth. And so looking to him, worship looks like that. God, you are truth, and you are wisdom. I believe, I agree with you. And the result is that when we do this, we see reality for what it really is. Look at what he says at the end here. This is so cool. So that if we're not conformed, but we're transformed by the renewing of our mind, the result is so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. The other side of it is, so when we worship, we saw in Psalms, when you worship inanimate things, you become like people that they have eyes that can't see, they have ears that can't hear. And he's saying, no, when on the other side, when you worship God, what happens is you gain discernment. You have eyes, you can see what is true. Before you couldn't. You have ears, you can hear the voice of God speaking to you. This is the way, walk in it. So he's saying your eyes become open to what is truly life. I love in 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18 that we read earlier, he talks about that it's like a mirror. Like you're looking in a mirror and you're seeing God. You're worshiping God. Hey, God, I'm looking to you. I'm believing what you say is true, and my life is for you today. And what happens is we are transformed to the image of the thing that we worship. We are made to reflect the image of the thing that we worship. Our lives are like a mirror that reflects whatever it is that we're focusing on. Back in 1980 something, I don't remember exactly the year, but I remember I was in middle school, and we didn't have all that much to do, to be honest. A little bit less distractions, but one thing that we did have to do was Raleigh Skateland. And I don't know if there's anyone in the room that was a Raleigh Skateland person. We had a ton of them at the early service, and I guess they were all there. No, there's others. There's others. You went to a different Skateland. You're like, why would anyone go to Raleigh? We'll talk later. But back then you could. And so we went to Raleigh Skateland. And it was super fun. All of our friends would go. And when I say all of our friends, it was like all of the guys were on this side and all of the girls were on that side. Because we were in middle school and we didn't ever talk to each other. But it was super fun. And we would skate around. There would be a song playing like Ghostbusters. I remember this was a big one. Somebody in the first service said We Built This City was the big one, so maybe that was the one for you. You guys weren't there anyway, so you're not a part of this. But here's something that you might have noticed, you might not have noticed if you were there. In the early parts of the night when you're just skating around and the lights are all up and all of that, there was something hanging right in the middle of the room. And you wouldn't have seen it because it's unremarkable by itself. It's just hanging there, and it's kind of tucked up into the ceiling. And again, I got corrected after the first service. I said some people call it a disco ball, and some people call it a mirror ball. And I've been told no one calls it a mirror ball except me. But I think it's a better term because it is a ball literally covered in mirrors. Maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't know. But it's up there. But if it's up there by itself, it's not remarkable at all. But there's a moment. And we all knew it was coming. And it was couples skate. And you better have worked out ahead of time who on the other side of the dark room is going to come skate over, grab your hand, and is going to couple skate with you. Because it's going to be embarrassing if you didn't work it out ahead of time. So we all did. And it was couple skate time. You went out and you put your hand out. You took their hand. You didn't talk. That was off limits. You skated. You didn't look at each other. There are rules. But this is the magical thing that happened, and the whole reason I'm telling you the story. Other than I think it's funny. When this mirror ball would drop down when it was time. It would drop down, maybe just a foot or two. Still didn't look remarkable. It was just like, oh, you can see it hanging there. But there was a moment when a light came on over from the side, and maybe multiple, I don't remember, but I just remember that the mood and the atmosphere in the room changed completely. We went from lights up, Ghostbusters, to mirror ball down, light dancing everywhere, You're the Inspiration, or some song by Peter Cetera, or Chicago, something like that. I know he's so tempted to play it right now. It'd be kind of funny if he did. No, he's not going to do it. But when that thing came down and the light shone off of it, you were like, wow, now I see why that thing's there. I see now the purpose of this mirror ball, because it was just up there, and now it's changed everything. It's changed the whole atmosphere of this room because of the way that the light reflects off of that thing, and look in all the corners. This is incredible. And you guys, I tell you that because that's you. That's me. That's what we were made to do. You might look at me and you might say, well, Dave, I understand that because you're unremarkable as well. And that's true. And you might just walk right by and you might think, well, there's just, you pass people all day, every day. And you're like, it's just another person. But when a person created as a mirror opens up their heart and life to the source of life, and turns their heart toward God, and the glory of God is reflected through the life of a person, you know what people say? They don't look at that person and say, wow, Beth. Wow, Chase. No, they look at that person and they say, wow, God. Has to be. Because I know Chase. I know Beth. They're unremarkable. I love them. But they're just a person just like me and you. But there's something being reflected through their life that is captivating. It seems like when I see them, it seems like I'm seeing someone who feels complete. I know they've got problems. I know they're not perfect, just like me, but they have a joy in their life that I don't know anything about. And I want to see that reflected in my life. And the other thing I want to tell you about the mirror ball or the disco ball, if that bothers you, is that it had a short time to shine. Came down, one song, maybe two. I was so focused on not falling and looking like a dummy the whole time that I don't know how many songs it was. It seemed like a long time. But it came down, and then it was gone. Lights went back to normal. The mirror ball moment was over. And I don't want to be morose or macabre or any of those other words, but our mirror ball moment is going to be over. And the scriptures say that we're like a mist. It appears for a minute, and then it's gone. And we all know that's true. But we've got one moment while we're on this planet to shine. And true, yeah, we're going to worship in heaven, but that's a totally different atmosphere. I'm talking about right here, in the midst of all the distractions, in the midst of everything that is vying for your worship and vying for your support, everything that says, look at me, I'm true, everything that comes into your life and says, hey, put me up at the top, I am the most valuable. We've got one moment to say, no, there is one that is worthy of praise and honor and glory, and it is the King of Kings. And with whatever moment I've got in this life, I'm going to point my heart towards him, and I'm going to say, hey, come let your glory shine in my life and reflect, you do through me whatever it is you want to do. Because there's people all around you. First of all, this is how you were made to live. This is the only way you will ever feel the abundant life that Jesus said he came to give. But there are people around you. There are David Foster Wallaces all around you that say, I've tried everything else, and I just need to see somebody that's found the answer. Somebody in your family, somebody in your sphere of influence, in your school, your job, in the car line, needs to see somebody that's cut off and doesn't immediately just try to run somebody over.